I think COVID has done is to prove to every company and investor that ESG does matter. It does create value, because I think and that's especially true for at Liberty. We have most of our employees working from home. And I don't think that would have been possible had we not invested in building that infrastructure that is needed at the core to support good, inclusive employee engagement, etc. And infrastructure. So when I talk about infrastructure, I'm not just talking about IT. Yes, we had built up IT, the cloud, etc., that allowed for our employees to work from home. But they also focused front and center on employee comfort, right? So there was a push to see, do employees have the infrastructure at home? Do they have the chairs? Do they have the computer, the monitors, etc.? And those were shipped to employees who needed that infrastructure at home to be able to work from home. That's an example of how the employee focus really pushed and got the company to think about such issues. I would also say that employee engagement, there was a huge focus. We continue to have that focus on employee engagement, but at Liberty, for example, every month we test employer, we get a score for employee engagement. And as an employee, I have to answer 2 questions. Are you motivated to do your job? And would you recommend Liberty for a place to work? And through the pandemic, we continued to do that exercise, and we see that as a forward-looking metric. So it allows for us to identify dips if from a historic perspective, month to month. And if we see a dip in any of the teams, we have human resources step in and support managers and employees to get that back up. Right, so it becomes a forward-looking tracking mechanism to allow for intervention at the right time. And that has really helped through COVID, because we've been able to see how employees are engaged through the process. I would also say another thing that COVID has done, every company talks about values, but COVID has tested the values, right? It's also given companies the platform to make those decisions based on those values that companies had, until it's not just words on a paper. And so the fact that I think many of you have talked about how your CEOs, and Penny, you talked about how your CEO came out and made a statement. Our CEO also reached out to our employees, right? And that's because it was about the right thing to do. And if there's any doubt, you point to the values. These are the values we've talked about. And yes, they were on paper, but COVID has helped us bring that front and center. So I think if anything, ESG, which always has been important at Liberty, it makes it even more important, I think, not only for our company, for every company, and I think out there for the economy in general. And so when we talk about building back, and you're building back clean, green, inclusive, these are things that I think every company at this point is thinking about. And I'd like to focus a bit on climate now, because that is a large part of the big challenge we have, even with the pandemic. I think the fact that we have a huge challenge as citizens of the world facing us, and how we're going to address it. When it comes to financial services, what's interesting is my colleagues here, a lot of their emissions are from the scope 1, scope 2, right? And for us, it's a large part of it is in our supply chain, or our book of business, which is the underwriting book of business or the investment book of business. And, we've been doing a lot in terms of building out our sustainability portfolios, etc. But the reality is you need a more strategic approach to how you're going to really support the transition, an economic transition. You mentioned how we touch almost every sector out there. And there are people out there who believe that, insurance companies should start the transition today and stop insuring certain parts of the economy because they're not viable. But when you think about the role that insurance plays in the marketplace and how integrated it is in the financial ecosystem, you, for example, even an individual cannot get a loan to buy a house if they don't have insurance. Same thing with companies, right? So I think we're thinking of it from a responsible transition, and we think that immediate transition will result in a lot of financial chaos in the financial markets, which is not responsible. So that has really led us to focus on how we can build back better. And I think for us, we've thought of ESG front and center first as an opportunity, or climate change is an opportunity, not necessarily only a risk that needs to be mitigated. And I think my colleagues on the panel have given some great examples. But we are thinking of it as, how do we lift all boats? Because that's what needs to happen. If I need to clean up my supply chain or my book of business in the portfolio, or I have to help all my portfolio companies get better. That doesn't just include the large caps who are represented today, but the mid caps, the small caps, because they are also our customers and clients. So we're looking at insurance stewardship, not just asset stewardship, but insurance stewardship, working with companies. The other area, as I talked about, was building up the solutions book of business, or the sustainable book of business, investing in green and ensuring green. And then there's that risk mitigation aspect of what's your current book of business and what can you address. And I'll give you an example. I'll give you two examples, actually. One is we have a coal divestment policy by 2023. Thermocoal. And our insurance underwriters came up with a coal company who would typically hit that, would be defined by, as we've defined it in the policy, as a company that you would probably not have in your portfolio. But the opportunity was helping the company transition, and so it was for a renewable or a green investment that the coal company was making to transition. And for us, that is responsible transition. Yes, it's a coal company, but it is transitioning its own business. And that's the area where we feel it's important for us to play a role in and not just reject it. So that's one example. And the other example I'd like to give is that of, we recently invested in Jupiter, a company, a data analytics company that gives you hyper-local risk information on climate change from physical risk perspective. And that's an example where we can use that technology to support our customers, our clients, from a stewardship perspective, to give them insights into their own activities and risks. And then it also allows for us to mitigate risks while allows us to invest for the future. So that's how we're thinking about it at Liberty.